Like a little bit of pomp and circumstance could actually be a beautiful way to show some care to yourself and not just be like, all right, I'm going to rub one out. Like, which again, I really want to be clear that none of this is a judgment on the ways that we do masturbate. Like, I've got my stuff, we've all got our stuff, but this is about a new possibility, right? And so coming to it with a lot of intentionality that does not have to be complicated, but it is about getting clear, why am I going to do this? And if it is the intention to mindfully masturbate, why is the first question to ask yourself.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sexology Podcast. I am so excited to welcome back Darshana Avila. Darshana, welcome to our show.
Thank you. So happy to be back with you.
It's always such a treat to have you on our show. Recently, I have been reading a lot, noticing people are talking about mindful masturbation. Mm-hmm. So this is what we're going to focus on. And it's a form of self-care. I know as an expert in the field, you're talking about connecting with the body is something that you promote a lot in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. So is this a newer thing that you're also hearing about mindful masturbation? How do you think it's entered the public conversation so frequently?
Yeah. Admittedly, I have a bias because I feel like I've been talking about mindful masturbation for a very long time. And I love knowing that others are. And I do think that, as there's more statistical evidence and there's common conversations that are going on about the impact of, for instance, like porn use and masturbation that is more, as I like to say, more about getting off as opposed to getting in, meaning getting in touch with yourself, really getting into an attuned state where, as you said, it is more of a form of self-care and self-exploration. Like, people feel the ways in which that's not actually satisfying to just chase the climax and the orgasm at a certain point. And then there's also mindfulness in all its many forms as something that, while certainly not new, only seems to grow and grow and grow in popularity and find its way in to so many facets of our life. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me that people are talking about it, and I love it. It's a wonderful thing to both be in conversation about, but of course to actually be in your own practice of. So
I love that. I think the more that we're connected with our body and our senses, the better, like majority of people, the better experience that they will have. Like, it's a learning curve and there's a unlearning that comes with it.
Very much so.
It can be very powerful. And hopefully everyone out there, they know that masturbation is normal. There's nothing wrong with it. Mm-hmm. But we have a way that's kind of more habitual. And we are in a kind of, like, as you said, thinking about getting off. And there is this way of mindfully engaging in it. Can you tell us what is the different and what different purposes they serve?
Yeah. So the one thing that I often think is helpful to understand is there's a very good reason why we have that habitual way of masturbating. And when you get how our brains work, it can shed a light on many people feel frustrated because objectively they're like, yeah, I'd love to mix it up. I actually would like masturbation to feel more expansive, and yet they struggle to create new habits around it. And the reason why is that our brains are wired for efficiency and to go toward what is familiar. So many of us, maybe even before we have conscious memories, we started to pleasure ourselves in a particular way. We discovered our genitals. We discovered that it feels good. You start touching, moving, doing whatever you're doing. Again, maybe before sex had really even come onto the radar. And so your body not only gets trained to that, but so does your mind. And if you've ever heard it said that your biggest sex organ is in between your ears, that's accurate because what's going on there really does shape the whole physical experience. So many of us, fast forward well into our adulthood, are more or less still masturbating the way we did when we were younger. Whether that was your 2-year-old self stumbling onto something and being like, oh, that feels nice, or you started in your teens or your 20s or whatever it is, if you found a route that made you get from A to B, with A being I register some degree of turn on and desire and I want to do this, and B being I'm having the hoped for experience, the climax, whatever it may be, it makes sense that then we're going to repeat that. And what ends up happening is that becomes a really well-worn neural pathway. It's like I liken it to if you're going on a hike somewhere that has beautifully maintained trails and it's clear and there's not a drop of litter or mud or anything, and it's a perfect path. And then the moment you want to introduce a new form of masturbation, you might as well be bushwhacking through a jungle with a machete in your hand because that path doesn't exist. And so that's what we're working against as adults who might be looking to introduce new forms of masturbation into our lives, new ways of connecting with our body, exploring pleasure, whatever it may be. Where mindfulness can be really, really helpful is we need to create a degree of focus and discipline if we want to clear new pathways and actually have access to a wider range of solo sex. And this is honestly, it's the same for partnered sex too. Like, these things do carry over. So mindfulness is what allows us to stay present with our sensations, to notice the thoughts and the emotions and things that might rise up, but not attached to them. And when we put these two things together, a cultivation of mindfulness and an ability to actually say, okay, there goes a thought. I don't have to actually respond to that. If that thought is, you know what, I just want to turn on my porn that I know works for me. Or, oh, I thought I wasn't going to use my vibrator today, but, that would really feel really good. We can register the thought and thanks to mindfulness, have a degree of choice and discipline to say, I'm tuning into my sensations right now. I'm going to be with what's here in my body. I'm going to choose to explore anyway. And to be completely frank, sometimes when we are trying to learn different ways, add variety into the mix of our masturbation, at moments we're going to encounter boredom. At moments we're going to encounter it feeling a little less stimulating than what we're used to, simply because it's unfamiliar. And to your point earlier, there's a learning and an unlearning going on, right? Like we're like unlearning or unwinding that deeply entrenched pattern a little bit as we are creating a new one, learning how to make a new one. So this is it's there's effort involved, but it's a really good effort. It's a really worthy effort. And what awaits, on the other side of that is a far more expanded range then of ways to be in that intimate connection with yourself, ways to access pleasure. And the more you know about you and how you operate and what does it for you, then that's more pathways that you ultimately have to bringing goodness and satisfaction into your life. And I think probably all of us want that. So it's a worthy practice.
I love that you talked about the boredom piece because I'm going to out myself. That's my biggest setback. Like, as someone in the field of sexual health, we get access to so many great different ways to connect with your body. I hear about all different types of wiring that can help with your orgasm. And as soon as I find myself in that jungle with the roadblock, I was like, okay, this is like, does it worth it? I feel like the boredom gets in the way. Tell us what would be the benefit of going through that more unknown path.
Yeah. Well, I think a good place to establish benefit is we can draw a parallel between partnered sex and solo sex. Most of us, again, I'm making an assumption here. So if this doesn't happen to apply to you, dear listener, like just, keep with us. But most of us want variety. And we want novelty, and that actually is a way to access greater degrees of satisfaction. And so in the same way that if we have the same kind of partner sex over and over and over, and it becomes almost like a paint by numbers type of thing, where it's like, okay, you touch me here, and now we kiss, and we go into this position, and da, 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 da. At a certain point, boredom is going to come into play with that too. And you're going to stop getting the same degree of mileage out of it. And it's no different with solo sex. So when we're masturbating, the reason for sticking with yourself through the boredom is because what is on the other side is a lot more novelty, a lot more range. And when I often coach people around, what you just described there, it's common, right? Like sometimes we do get bored, especially if you are looking to shift a pattern. I like the examples that I already used. Often people want to shift their relationship to porn. Or maybe if you use a lot of toys, vibrators or whatever it might be, people with penises, people with vulvas, people with whatever genitals, and you want to have the possibility of going without those. There is going to be a period of time where the sensation you're used to, the climax, that intensity probably isn't going to be there immediately. And I know it can be hard to have the discipline to stay with it through that phase. But again, you will then be able to open up a much wider array of ways to be sexual and to be in that creativity. And fundamentally, that's what sex is. Sex, eroticism, it is a creative process. In the most literal sense, we're talking about procreation, but many of us listening, either that's not our path, it never was, or it already has been. And so what we're here exploring through sex are creative ways to be connected to our body, to access pleasure, to access altered states of consciousness even. So masturbation is going to get you there if you allow it to. And in this instance, really, to answer the question, it's like I'm asking folks listening to kind of take me at my word when I say, like, stick through the boredom long enough, give yourself enough of a chance to open up those other possibilities. And I promise you're going to like it.
I like that the kind of analogy you brought up, because we tend to go with things that we like, right? Like it's like, even like if it's like you're going to this amusement park, this roller coaster that you like, right? You're just like going toward that versus thinking about, okay, what's out there, and then it can kind of explore and kind of maybe you find other options or additions or your new favorite way of experiencing joy. And you brought up such a good point with people wanting to change their relationship with the body. For a number of different reasons. Sometimes people want to stop consuming porn or some material, and they want to kind of use the fantasy, or they want to kind of like, I know for some of my clients, it is a value that they want to be able to masturbate the same way they connect with a partner. There's no right or wrong way of exploring your erotic self, but I can see that that is a journey that many people are interested in. So you can say, what I'm hearing, it's like it seems like you can slow down and rediscover what's there.
Yeah.
When we're talking about mindful masturbation, I know it can look different for different people, but what are some of the important concepts around that?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, it's how you enter into the practice that is setting the tone for the whole thing. So you can think of masturbation in this way as a ritual. And one of the simplest ways to define a ritual is that you come with a clear intention and you have an opening and a closing to the experience, where in the opening, you're aligning with that intention. So for the sake of an example, it could be taking a few deep breaths. It could be spending a moment sitting in stillness with yourself, or even looking at yourself in the mirror, maybe disrobing in a more ceremonial way. Like a little bit of pomp and circumstance could actually be a beautiful way to show some care to yourself and not just be like, all right, I'm going to rub one out. Like, which again, I really want to be clear that none of this is a judgment on the ways that we do masturbate. Like I've got my stuff, we've all got our stuff, but this is about a new possibility, right? And so coming to it with a lot of intentionality, that does not have to be complicated, but it is about getting clear, why am I going to do this? And if it is the intention to mindfully masturbate, why is the first question to ask yourself. Maybe you want access, as you said, to a wider array of pleasure. Maybe you really have neglected your body in all manner of ways, or not prioritized your desires, your needs in partnered connection. And so you're using your solo space as a means of kind of making an amends with yourself. These are just some of the possibilities. So getting still enough and clear enough in your intention at the start is the first step to mindful masturbation. Then there's what are you doing during the process? And some of the same tips that I would give people learning how to be more skillful at touching someone else apply to how we touch our body. The number one thing there is don't go straight for your genitals. You are a whole person. You've got a lot more real estate in your body than what is between your legs. And so I really think that spending time very intentionally touching your whole body, introducing different sensations, and then those sensations can be also a means of introducing different emotions, different energetics. So if you want to be slow and tender with yourself, fiercely and furiously rubbing at your genitals is probably not going to convey that kind of energy, right? So we want to spend time touching the perimeter of our body, letting our hands explore, maybe using other toys or tools or types of sensations. You can have a whole collection of things that fall under the heading of sex toys. You could also probably open up your kitchen drawers and your linen closet and find things to be creative with, a silk scarf, a fork, anything that brings new sensation and texture in is a wonderful way that you can explore with your own body. Does not have to be genitally focused, and then progress toward that in the same way that you would have a progression of intimacy building from a lesser intensity to a higher intensity in a partnered exchange. You can create those same kind of circumstances. And it's remarkable. I talk to so many people who acknowledge that, yeah, they're like, when I masturbate, I pretty much just, vibrator is immediately on my clit, or I'm immediately stroking my cock. Like there's no preamble. And so imagine then if you gave yourself even 5 minutes to spend with your body and what you might learn about the ways you like to be touched there and how it might feel to really honor yourself enough to say, I'm going to slow down all these busy things, all these demands on my time and my attention in life. I'm going to put that to the side. And my focus is me with me in this moment. It's a very profound gift to give ourselves our own attention. It is not easy. We live in a time, we live in a culture where the fight for our attention, is constant. It's a battle, even, to say, like, everything with social media and constantly being plugged in. And so this opportunity to really turn toward yourself is pretty precious. Take it, and then let whatever you're doing, if you can slow it down by half, so like, even just for a few minutes, be in a slower way of touching your body, a slower way of touching your genitals, and let that intensity build gradually instead of going from 0 to 60. That right there creates more possibility that the mindfulness, which fundamentally is paying closer attention to sensation, paying closer attention to what are the thoughts and the feelings that arise. But as I said earlier, not getting attached to them. It's a noticing. You get to notice more of yourself, and you get to be present, be a witness to more of your internal landscape, as much as like what your body's communicating to you through the language of feeling, through sensation. And then, to close the ritual, this is another thing where, I get a lot of wonderful quote unquote confessions from people where they feel like they're telling me, and it's something very private, but it's like, yeah, if people tell me I masturbate to porn, and like the moment I climax, I slam my laptop shut, or I throw my phone, and it's like, okay, get up and go. And it's like, that's not uncommon if that's your experience. And so the invitation here, if you're choosing to be more mindful, is then spend a few minutes with yourself at the end. Lay still, put a hand on your heart, just take stock of what's moving in your body. You could do a little journaling on the other side and have that be the closing of said ritual. So again, I'm not talking about anything especially ornate or complicated, so much as bringing a lot of intentionality and a bit more spaciousness to the experience. That's what's going to set it apart from your more typical masturbation session, and let it be something truly mindful.
And I love specifically the concept of mindful masturbation, because it can be so rich as far as the emotion. that shows up, because for many people, the self-critical voice gets loud, whether it's about their body, about their kind of like their genital shape, all form of things.
Mhm.
What do you recommend people to do when they notice that kind of difficult emotion comes up?
Mhm. Yeah. First of all, I'm normalizing it. That's the thing I want to say. What you just described, I know, both as a professional and even personally, like it's part of the experience. And so let's normalize that most of us are walking around with a pretty well-established inner critic in there that will creep in and chime in. It's sometimes in very inopportune moments. And so in normalizing it, I just want to say, like, we don't actually have to freak out in the face of that. We can be like, okay, I hear that critical voice. A lovely question that I like to ask my critic back is that true? Is the horrible thing that you're telling me to believe about myself, objectively speaking, is it true? Is it absolutely true that there is something wrong with my body? Is it absolutely true that the size or the shape of my genitals are in some way problematic? Like, is this truly, irrefutably a statement of fact? And spoiler alert, the answer is pretty much always going to be no, it's not. And so if we can diffuse the intensity of that critic's voice and really just come back to a place of equanimity, like, yeah, this is the body that I'm in, thus it's the body I'm meant to be in. These are the genitals that I have, thus they are the genitals that I have, and I can make peace with that. Another thing too, and this is, across the board, partnered, solo, asexual, whatever it is, this culture that teaches us that certain bodies are right and other bodies are wrong, right? Like we are so steeped in that soup, as it were, that we've all been cooked in. And I really believe, like, one of the most profoundest forms of activism that any of us can take is to love our own selves, to not buy into that. So yeah, your body is just as beautiful and just as deserving of pleasure and care and attention as every other body is. There's not actually a hierarchy of more deserving and less deserving. That's a construct. You don't have to buy into it. And if you're somebody who actually values what I just said, kind of out in the wild, out in the wider sense, if you are a more social justice driven individual, this is a way that you actually get to bring that home and embody it with and for yourself. Your body is just as beautiful as any other body, and your body is just as deserving of pleasure as any other body. So give it to yourself. Let yourself have that.
I truly believe that pleasure is a activism, especially for people like minorities of all types, and kind of like engaging in it on your own, exploring your pleasure. It can be very powerful. So thank you for all that helpful frame. And one thing I hear at times from people that are trying to shift their masturbation habit is that I'm not experiencing arousal. The frustration of, like, maybe I used to use a specific porn for masturbation. I no longer want to explore it. And therefore, through this, I'm not getting an erection.
Mhm.
What do you recommend for people to explore for that?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's certainly talking about like the research and the evidence and the things that we now are coming to know more commonly is that many people, especially males and people with penises, like if there really is significant porn use, it's usually that you have to continually keep upping the ante on what you are seeing on the screen, what you are taking in order to get that same feedback loop internally, the same cascade of chemicals, the same arousal. And so it's not unfounded, like that, like I want to say, like, to be empathetic, like it's not unfounded that you really might go through a period of time where if you make a conscious choice to stop watching porn altogether or to limit your use of it, to change what it is that you're consuming, then it's true that you might have a period of time where arousal doesn't feel as accessible to you. And in the same way that I spoke earlier about, like, I used that metaphor of traveling the really well-worn path versus bushwhacking a brand new one. This is the latter. And so bringing in more sensate focus, which is to say, really learning how to pay attention to what is going on for you on a physical level, the sensations in your body is what's the thing that I would be, if this was someone working with me, if it was a client in my practice, that's exactly what I would be encouraging is how do you cultivate more of a capacity to stay connected to the sensations in your body? Many of us really are very disconnected because again, talking about things that are normalized in the world we live in and the culture we're in, it's a culture fundamentally of disembodiment where mostly we treat ourselves and others as if we exist from the neck up. It's very mental, very intellectualized. And porn, regrettably, as much as it can be entertaining, and listen, I want to be clear, I'm a porn watcher. I'm a fan of good porn in particular. I think porn has its place. But when you are not mindful about how you're engaging with porn, it contributes to that disembodiment because many of us just end up tensing up really, really tightly and it's a lot of strain in the body and we're not paying attention to sensation because our eyes are glued to the screen. And all of our attention is outward as opposed to inward. So again, the sensate focus is the opposite there because it's about bringing attention inward into your body. And if that is new for you, there will be a learning curve. There will be a period of time when just like any new skill that you want to cultivate, it takes a bit of effort. Once that becomes more natural to you, feels more normal to you, you will then have access to a greater degree of arousal and pleasure. So once more, it's an instance of like, you kind of got to put your reps in order to get to the promise that like lives on the other side of it.
I love that kind of like thinking about how things will unfold and getting
Mhm.
curious about that and uh, kind of like knowing that this is the exploration journey can be helpful for people as kind of going back to your concept of intention. The intention
Mhm.
is connecting with the body and
Indeed.
hopefully that's where we are kind of like anchoring ourselves. For many people, they go to fantasy in order to experience an orgasm. Do you do you recommend people at a certain point, or it's kind of, I guess, quote unquote, allowed to go to fantasy, or we're just going based on this purely physiological sensation?
I think fantasy is fantastic and our imaginations are a wonderful place to go. And, if what I'll say there is most of us there's three channels that we tend to access our arousal through. And most of us have one that is the most familiar to us. And then we can train ourselves to be more fluent or have more ready access to the others. And those three are sensation. So we've already spoke about one, and that is to say there are some people who what comes naturally to them is to really be connected to what's going on in my body and source arousal and pleasure from that primarily. For other people, it's visual in an outward way. So that could be if it's a partner that you're with, you're paying attention to your partner. If it's porn that you're watching, you're paying attention to the porn. If it's erotica, you get the point here. The third route is fantasy. It's the use of our imagination. And the thing there that I also want to include is that sometimes when then this is not to like contradict what I just said about sensate focus being important, but sometimes if we're overly emphasizing the physical alone, especially if that's not the channel that is most familiar to us, it can feel a bit mechanistic and as if we're like just trying to press a button and be like, okay, now comes the arousal. And we're not all as simple as that. And so by conjuring images, narratives, what have you, in our imagination and using fantasy, we're actually including more of ourselves in the experience. And I think that's a good thing. So having a sense of the kinds of fantasies that worked for you, the thematic material that is really important. For instance, like one of my themes that just really does it for me, I have a thing around specialness and mastery. So those two words may or may not feel immediately like, what does that have to do with sex? Some people might be asking, but there are different dynamics and scenarios that I can then conjure fantasies around that often have to do with imbalances of power, because that does it for me. So, someone who's in a position of mastery and someone who is in a more subordinate position. We see this play out with, like teacher student dynamics, like the police officer and the person they're apprehending, age play, a lot of things that come up in role play scenarios in the wide world of kink. And so if you have a sense of what are those themes that actually help to spark a greater degree of aliveness and turn on for you, have at it. The beautiful thing about fantasy is that we also have access to things there that we maybe would never do in real life, whether that's because we simply don't want to, or we might fantasize about things that are not safe or consensual or legal, or this list could go on. And the beauty of keeping that in your fantasy world is that you are very, very much free to then get whatever degree of mileage out of that in terms of your own turn on that you can, while being in a safe and consensual relationship with the outer world. So fantasy definitely has a place there. And I really don't want people to think that somehow it is less than or cheating or what have you, if that's where you're going.
I like that. And I think that sometimes people say, oh, I don't have fantasy. If it's not visual, it's not going to work. But like there are often stories or some, as you say, context in
Mm-hmm.
these visual things that you can
Mm-hmm.
incorporate in your fantasies and bring elements of it to help you to
Yes.
build arousal and dim the arousal, like whatever goal that you have around that.
Yeah.
So for our male listeners that they
Mm-hmm.
want to go on this journey, what is one tip that you have for them as they're stepping in this kind of like going, shifting the way that
Mm-hmm.
they masturbate?
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say, for instance, if you are a porn watcher, then pause the porn for a little bit or avert your eyes from the screen. Any way that you are introducing a little space for a new element in your masturbation is going to be helpful. If you masturbate and you're always in the same position, put your body in a different position. These are all forms that mindfulness can take, is to be mindful and intentional about changing something up from your familiar pattern and actually being really deliberate. And it's going to, like I said before, it'll probably require a little discipline on your part to bring a new element in. And the other thing that I often, when I'm coaching around masturbation, I invite people to create something of a schedule for themselves where you give yourself the familiar way of masturbating, let yourself have your cake and eat it too. So if today is all right, I'm going to do what I know is kind of my typical way. Tomorrow is going to be a more mindful practice, whatever your cadence is, which is so that way there's not a sense of being deprived altogether and having it be a really austere practice, so much as little by little you're cultivating more capacity for this new form of being. You can kind of equate that to, let's say you follow a particular like dietary regimen and you eat nice and clean 6 days a week, and then there's one day of the week that you have your quote unquote cheat day. You can create a relationship with your masturbation that's similar to where you're working with a new discipline much of the time, and then occasionally still giving yourself the positive feedback loop of the familiar. This is what I've experienced for myself personally to be helpful. Like when I've wanted to break the consistent habit of like using a vibrator or watching porn or something that I've felt I'm kind of getting like caged in by and it's limiting my range, I'm intentional about giving myself a schedule then where it's like you get a few sessions of doing the new thing, the more mindful thing, and then okay, today we get to have it the familiar yummy way. And I found that can be helpful, to create a more realistic and balanced approach to bringing something new into your solo sex.
I love that. I haven't thought about it that way. It's more not coming from the place, as you mentioned, deprivation in a way. So it makes
Mhm.
it more sustainable.
Exactly.
I appreciate that. So, for our listeners, I know you teach so many skills, you have so many wonderful programming that they are interested to learn more about you and about your teaching. What are some of the
Yeah.
places they can find you?
Yeah, well, my website is a great place to connect, especially if you're interested in working with me directly. And I work primarily with women and AFAB folks, but to the men and the males listening, I work with couples as well. And absolutely, if it's a partner journey you're interested in, there's space for you there. I also have a lot of content on my YouTube channel, which is a wonderful way to then just hear more of what I have to say on all manner of things that are fall under the heading of sex and intimacy and relationships. And I also have a free online community called Galgasm that, again, is geared more toward the women and the AFAB folks who might be listening. And really, reach out. I am always delighted. Every time someone comes and says, "Oh, I heard you on such and such podcast," it's so fun, to know what it is that you resonated with and are curious about. And I really do believe that for all of us, every single person listening, for you, for me, it's like our erotic liberation is a contribution to our collective liberation. So each one of us that's choosing to bring a little more mindfulness, a little more expansiveness to how we embody our sexual energy and our erotic energy, that is how we create a new culture. So it's a privilege to get to chat with y'all, and I welcome people to reach out if they're inspired.
Well, thank you so much, as always, coming on this show and being so generous with your information. The link to the content you mentioned will be in the show notes, and hopefully, we'll have you in our future episodes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.